I was in the bathroom getting dressed for a friend's wedding and I couldn't stop admiring myself in the mirror. I had been working out for months, lifting weights, eating healthier, doing everything I could to get into the best shape of my life. I wasn't just feeling good about my body, I was feeling confident. For the first time in a long time, I looked at myself and thought, damn, I look good. The suit I'd bought for the wedding fit perfectly. It wasn't just the weight I'd lost, it was the new mindset I'd gained over the last year. I'd worked hard for this moment. I'd pushed myself, and it felt like I was finally in control of something. As I stood there adjusting my tie, I could hear my wife, Amy, in the bedroom behind me. She was finishing her makeup for the wedding, and I called out to her. "You look incredible, babe," I said, trying to get her attention. She didn't respond immediately. I waited for the usual compliment in return, the recognition that we often give each other, but nothing came. I was expecting her to smile and say something like, "You look great, too," or even, "Wow, look at you," but nothing. I turned to face her. She was still busy in front of the mirror, mascara brush in hand, focused on her reflection. I stood there in my perfectly fitted suit, feeling good about myself, and realized something I hadn't noticed before. She had never once commented on my appearance, not in the way I always complimented her. Not once had she ever told me I looked good or that she was attracted to me. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks. We'd been married for 5 years, and in all that time, I couldn't recall a single moment when she had complimented me on how I looked or how attractive I was. I had spent years supporting her, telling her how beautiful she was, how much I appreciated her, how stunning she looked in her dress or at the gym. But she had never, not once, done the same for me. I stood there, trying to process it before I blurted out the words that I would soon regret. "You know, I always tell you how beautiful you are, how much I'm attracted to you, but I can't remember the last time you said anything like that to me. Not once have you told me I look good or that I look handsome." I watched her pause, mascara brush hovering in the air, before she dismissed my words with a roll of her eyes. My stomach dropped. "Are you serious right now?" she said, her voice flat. "You're really going to make a big deal out of this?" I was stunned. I had opened myself up, vulnerable in a way I never had before, but her reaction was far from supportive. It felt like a slap in the face. I was hurt, but I pushed on, trying to understand why I felt so bad about it. "Do you even find me attractive?" I asked, my voice shaky. For a moment, there was silence. She didn't look up from her makeup. "Finally," she replied, in the most cold and indifferent tone I had ever heard. No, the words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I froze, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. She didn't find me attractive. The woman I had given my heart to, the person I had supported and built a life with, didn't think I was attractive. I asked her in a daze, "Why did you marry me then?" Her response was casual, as if the weight of her words didn't hit her the same way they hit me. "I didn't think it was important at the time, and that was it." That was all she said. I stood there, staring at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything I thought I knew about my relationship, everything I thought we shared, suddenly felt like a lie. How could she say that? How could someone who married you, who said they loved you, turn around and say they didn't find you attractive? It felt like everything I had been working towards, all the personal growth, was shattered in a single moment. All the effort I had put into my physical appearance, into feeling good about myself, had meant nothing. The truth hit me, I wasn't enough for her. I never had been. I didn't say anything more. I couldn't. I just stood there, silent, feeling ugly, unwanted, and worthless. I couldn't shake the thought. I hadn't been good enough for her, and now I couldn't unhear what she had said. I was the one left standing there, broken, while she continued to apply her mascara as if nothing had changed. After a few minutes, I excused myself. I didn't care about the wedding anymore. I didn't care about anything. I just needed to get out of that house, out of that moment. I left the bathroom and stepped outside into the cold air, hoping to clear my head. But it didn't help. Nothing helped. Days passed and I found myself still reeling from the conversation. I couldn't focus on anything. Work, friends, even our plans for the wedding, everything felt like it didn't matter anymore. I kept coming back to that one moment in the bathroom, that one moment where I realized she didn't love me the way I loved her. She didn't find me attractive, and that realization cut deeper than any argument we'd ever had. I tried to talk to her about it a few times, but every time I brought it up, she brushed me off. "It's not a big deal," she'd say. "Why are you still on about this?" But for me, it was a huge deal. I had spent so long believing that we were in this together that she saw me the way I saw her. But the truth was I had been alone in this relationship from the start. I had been pouring all my love, all my effort into a marriage where she was emotionally absent. I finally made a decision. After weeks of feeling numb and questioning everything, I realized that this wasn't love. This wasn't what a relationship was supposed to be. She wasn't going to change. And I couldn't keep pouring myself into something that didn't nourish me. I filed for divorce. The day I handed her the papers was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She was shocked, of course, and angry. But I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't live in a marriage where I was emotionally neglected, where I wasn't seen or appreciated for who I was. The hardest part wasn't the divorce itself, it was realizing that I had spent years believing in something that wasn't real. But as painful as it was, I knew it was the right choice. I was finally choosing myself. The process of healing was slow. The first few months felt like I was walking through a fog. I had to learn how to be okay with myself again, to find my worth without validation from someone else. I started therapy, spent time with friends who cared about me, and began to focus on what made me happy. And then one day, I looked in the mirror and realized something. I didn't feel ugly anymore. I didn't feel unwanted or less than. For the first time, I felt like I was enough, just as I was. Eventually, I moved on. It wasn't easy, and I didn't expect it to be. But I learned something important about myself. I am enough. I don't need someone else's approval to feel good about who I am. I'm finally living for myself without the weight of a relationship that never truly valued me. And while I may have been rejected in that moment, I now know I will never let anyone define my worth again. The divorce was finalized, but the process of truly letting go took much longer than I ever anticipated. I thought once the papers were signed, things would be easier, but I was wrong. The weight of the years we spent together didn't just disappear. I couldn't shake the feeling of loss, even though I knew deep down it was the right choice. For months, I lived in a kind of emotional limbo, trying to find peace while still mourning the life I had once believed in. I'd go to work, put on a mask of normalcy, and then come home to an empty apartment that didn't feel like home. It was a stark contrast to the life I had with Amy. Despite the pain, I refused to allow myself to sink back into the darkness that the marriage had created. I had to rebuild. I needed to reclaim my identity, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't just the emotional strain, there were financial strains too. We had accumulated debt together, and now I was handling it alone. At first, it seemed overwhelming. But with the support of friends, therapy, and a determined mindset, I started making progress. I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix, but I had already taken the hardest step. I had chosen to walk away. A few months after the divorce, I took a trip alone. A soul-searching journey to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. I went to a remote cabin in the mountains, hoping that the quiet would help me clear my mind. I spent days hiking through the trails, reading books, and simply reflecting on my life. I spent years giving Amy everything I had, and now I was forced to give myself the same kind of attention. I needed to learn how to validate myself without waiting for someone else's approval. And that trip was pivotal in my healing process. On the last day of my stay, I sat by the lake and realized something powerful. I hadn't just lost Amy, I had lost myself. In trying to make our relationship work, I had compromised so much of who I was. But this journey wasn't just about healing from the breakup. It was about finding my identity again. I was no longer just a husband, I was a man who could stand on his own. When I returned home, something was different. I felt lighter, more at peace with myself. It wasn't an instant transformation, but I was starting to see the world in a new light. I reconnected with old friends who had supported me during the divorce, and slowly but surely, I started to build new relationships. I had the freedom to do things I had never done in my marriage. Go out with friends, take weekend trips, and most importantly, live for myself. As time went on, I started dating again. But this time, I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was whole on my own. One evening, I met Sarah at a coffee shop. We hit it off right away. She wasn't like the others I'd dated in the past. She had her own life, her own passions, and didn't expect me to fill any void. We talked about our past relationships, and I shared my experience with Amy. I told her how I had let myself be someone I wasn't for so long. "You're you," she said, smiling. And that's enough. It was one of the simplest things anyone had said to me in a long time. But it was the truth I had been avoiding for so long. I was enough. As my relationship with Sarah grew, I realized that I had learned so much from my past mistakes. Amy's rejection had hurt, but it had also taught me something valuable. I don't need someone else to define my worth. I had spent so many years trying to prove my value to Amy, but the reality was that I had to prove my worth to myself first. Only then would I be able to be truly happy in a relationship. I started doing things for me. I got into photography, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I took long walks in the evenings, clearing my head and enjoying the peace I had fought so hard to find. At one point, Sarah asked me, "What's your biggest lesson from all of this?" I paused. There were so many lessons. But the one that stood out the most was this: don't lose yourself in someone else. No one will love you until you first love and respect yourself. Months passed, and while I was rebuilding my life, I had one last conversation with Amy. She reached out to me out of the blue, asking if we could meet. I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed. When we met, she apologized. She said she regretted not appreciating me and that she had realized she didn't love me the way I loved her. But it was too late. The man I was now was not the same man she had married. I wasn't angry, though. I simply told her, "I hope you find the happiness you're looking for." That conversation was the closure I needed. I realized I had spent so much time holding on to a version of her that no longer existed. I had to let go of the pain, the rejection, and everything else that tied me to that life. By the end of that year, I had built a life that was truly mine. I had a new career I was passionate about, a relationship with Sarah that made me feel seen and valued, and a renewed sense of self-worth. I no longer needed validation from anyone. I was enough. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The final lesson was clear: I never married the wrong person. I married someone who was perfect for me at the time. But what I hadn't realized was that I was so focused on trying to make someone else happy that I forgot to make myself happy first. Now, I know the value of self-respect, self-love, and independence. These aren't just lessons from a failed marriage. They're the building blocks of the man I am today. The months following the divorce were filled with personal growth. At first, it was hard to feel like I was truly healing. The remnants of a life I had built with Amy lingered everywhere. The bed we used to share. The photos we had taken during vacations. It all seemed to haunt me, reminding me of the man I once was, a man who thought he wasn't good enough unless someone else validated him. But slowly, things began to change. I found myself smiling again. Not because of someone else's approval, but because I was genuinely content with who I was. There were moments when I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't hate the reflection staring back at me. I wasn't just the guy who had been rejected. I was a man who had gone through pain, learned from it, and come out stronger. I spent more time with my friends. I reconnected with old hobbies I had abandoned. Photography was something I always wanted to explore, but I had never made time for it during the marriage. Now I spent weekends in parks, taking photos of sunsets, nature, and anything that sparked my creativity. It gave me a sense of peace and purpose that had been missing for so long. One Saturday, I went to a local photo exhibition. As I walked around, I realized that photography wasn't just a hobby. It was my escape, my form of expression, my way of processing everything I had been through. I remember the first time I bumped into Amy after the divorce. It was completely accidental. I was walking down the street when I saw her from a distance. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't run. I stood my ground, and as we passed each other, I nodded. "Hey," she said quietly. I stopped, unsure of what to say. There was still so much anger and hurt inside me. But instead of letting it consume me, I took a deep breath. "Hey," I replied. "How are you?" It was awkward, and there was a long silence. But then she spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything. I know I didn't treat you right, and I'm sorry." I wasn't expecting an apology, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. But I also didn't want to hold on to the resentment anymore. For the first time, I realized forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me. "I'm sorry too," I said, surprising myself, "for staying too long, for not seeing the signs. But we're both better off now." She nodded, her eyes slightly watering. "I agree. I hope you find happiness." "I hope you do too," I said, and with that, we parted ways. That brief moment of peace was all I needed. I had finally forgiven her, but more importantly, I had forgiven myself for allowing the relationship to define my worth. One of the hardest things to adjust to after the divorce was co-parenting with Amy. It was a constant battle of balancing schedules, sharing responsibilities, and maintaining a healthy relationship for Olivia's sake. There were days when it was easy. We'd work together on drop-offs, have brief conversations about Olivia's needs, and even share a laugh here and there. But then there were moments where it felt like we were right back in the thick of things. One afternoon, Olivia was playing at my place when Amy called. It was a simple conversation, but the underlying tension was always there. "I think you're overstepping with the amount of time she's spending at your place. I want more control over her routine." I held back my frustration. "Amy, we agreed to share custody. She needs both of us. We need to put her first." "I know," she said, her tone softening. "I just don't want to lose control of her. I miss having her here all the time." It hit me hard. Amy wasn't just struggling with the divorce. She was struggling with being a mother in a split family. We were both learning how to co-parent and share our daughter. But the wounds from the past made it harder. I decided that I wasn't going to be her punching bag anymore. I wasn't going to get caught up in her emotional battles. For Olivia's sake, I had to set clear boundaries and make sure I was doing what was best for her. Not for Amy, not for me, but for Olivia. There was a moment, months after the divorce, that solidified everything for me. I was sitting in the park one afternoon with Olivia, watching her run around and play. She had this innocent joy, the kind that only children can have. She looked up at me with a wide smile and said, "I love spending time with you, Daddy. You're always so happy now." In that moment, it hit me like a lightning bolt. I was finally happy. I had spent years wondering if I was good enough, if I was deserving of love, if I could find peace after all the heartbreak. But Olivia's words were a reminder that I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And for the first time in years, I could say that I was proud of the person I had become. With time, I began to focus even more on myself. My career flourished, my relationships grew healthier, and my bond with Olivia grew stronger. I started dating again, but this time I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for validation. I was already whole. One evening, I sat with Sarah at a local coffee shop. We had been dating for a few months and things were starting to get serious. I realized that I had found someone who respected me, who didn't try to change me, and who loved me for exactly who I was. I never understood what it was like to feel at peace, I told Sarah one evening. But now I do. She smiled, squeezing my hand. "It's amazing, isn't it?" For the first time, I felt like I had truly found happiness on my terms. It had been over a year since the divorce, and I had come to terms with everything. I had learned that sometimes walking away from the wrong person isn't about giving up, it's about finding yourself. Amy and I were still co-parenting. We weren't best friends, but we had reached a place where we could respect each other for the sake of Olivia. I had found peace with the past, and I was finally living a life where I didn't need someone's approval to feel worthy. And so I moved forward. No regrets. No looking back. Just a future built on the lessons of the past and a new chapter where I finally prioritized my own happiness. The final lesson came to me one night as I watched Olivia asleep on the couch beside me. I realized that self-love isn't just about validation from others, it's about accepting yourself and choosing to be at peace with who you are. I had finally stopped searching for someone else to make me feel complete. I didn't need a partner to feel worthy. I didn't need Amy's love to feel whole. I was enough on my own. That was the greatest gift I had given myself. As the months passed, I started realizing how much emotional baggage I had been carrying for years. It wasn't just about the marriage, the betrayal, or the way Amy had treated me. It was about everything that had built up over time, the suppressed anger, the constant self-doubt, the feeling of not being enough. For a long time, I thought that by changing myself for Amy, by sacrificing my needs to make her happy, I would find happiness. But the truth was, I had never truly looked at my own desires. I had lost sight of who I was in the process. I had always been a people pleaser, trying to keep the peace, trying to make sure everyone around me was happy while I just went along with it. But no more. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't. I couldn't keep molding myself into what others wanted me to be. This was my life, and I had to live it on my own terms. It wasn't until I met Isabel that I realized I was capable of building something new, something real. Isabel was different from the women I had dated in the past. She was independent, strong, and unapologetically herself. But more importantly, she was someone who didn't need me to change to love me. At first, I was cautious. I didn't want to rush into anything. I wasn't ready to jump into a relationship just because I was lonely. I needed to make sure I was ready for it, that I was whole before I involved someone else in my life. Isabel understood this. She didn't push me to define our relationship right away. We took it slow, spent time getting to know each other, and shared our pasts with open honesty. It was refreshing. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I could breathe again, without feeling like I was suffocating under someone else's expectations. There were times when I still felt the old insecurities creep up. I'd look in the mirror and think, am I good enough for her? I'd remember the rejection from Amy and the deep scars it left on my heart. It was hard to trust again. But Isabel was patient. She never made me feel like I was less than. She never compared me to anyone else. She just loved me for who I was, flaws and all. I remember the first time I told her about the hurt I'd been carrying. We were sitting on the couch, just talking about our pasts. I told her how Amy's rejection still haunted me, how I had spent years chasing love, but never receiving it in return. Isabel listened, nodded, and then said, "You don't have to prove anything to me. You're enough, just the way you are." That was the moment I realized that I didn't need to earn love. It was something I was already worthy of. And for the first time, I felt truly seen. As I grew closer to Isabel, I began to rediscover my voice. I had spent so many years feeling small, feeling like I wasn't important enough to stand up for myself. I had let people walk over me, especially in my marriage. But now, with Isabel by my side, I felt empowered. We spent weekends exploring the city, eating at new restaurants, and just enjoying each other's company. Every moment with her felt like a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I could finally be myself, unashamed and free. One night, after a long walk by the lake, I told her about a dream I had always had, to start my own business. I had always been too scared to take that leap. In the past, I had let my fear of failure hold me back. But now I felt like I was ready. Isabel smiled at me and said, "You can do it. I believe in you." That was all I needed to hear. The next few months were a whirlwind. I started researching business ideas, putting together a plan, and finally took the plunge. The first few steps were intimidating, the uncertainty, the risks, the possibility of failure. But I didn't care. I was doing something for myself for the first time in a long time. And when the business started picking up, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just the financial success that mattered. It was the freedom, the feeling that I was finally in control of my own destiny. Through the struggles, the long hours, and the moments of doubt, I found a strength in myself I never knew existed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Over time, my relationship with Isabel deepened. We became partners, not just in love, but in life. We worked together, supported each other's dreams, and built a future full of possibility. But the most important thing I realized was that I didn't need someone to complete me. I was already whole. Through all the pain, the heartbreak, and the mistakes, I learned something invaluable. I am enough. I didn't need Amy's love, and I didn't need anyone's approval. As for my relationship with Amy, it was distant but cordial. We would check in about Olivia and co-parent as best as we could. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had ever been when we were married. For the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. I liked who I had become. I had gone through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. In the end, I realized that everything I had gone through wasn't something I regretted. Sure, it hurt at the time. Sure, I was angry. But those emotions were the catalyst for the transformation I needed. I had rebuilt my life. Stronger, more confident, and more sure of myself than I had ever been before. The greatest lesson of all? It wasn't about finding the right person. It was about becoming the right person. And that's exactly what I did. A year later, as I sat in my office overlooking the city, I felt a sense of contentment I had never known. I had built a business, a relationship with a woman who truly valued me, and a life full of opportunities. I was in control, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting for approval. I was living for myself. As I looked at my life now, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Every milestone I had reached felt like a testament to the hard work I had put in. Not just in business, but in myself. It wasn't always easy to stay motivated, especially in the early days after the divorce. But I knew I had to keep going. The hardest part was learning to trust myself again. There were days when I still doubted my worth. Days when I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I wasn't enough, that I wasn't good enough to build the life I wanted. But over time, I came to understand that those moments were just the echoes of my past, whispers from a person who no longer existed. The old me, the one who sought constant validation from Amy, was gone. What remained was a man who had learned to stand on his own 2 feet, who had learned that self-worth doesn't come from external validation, but from within. I started surrounding myself with people who valued me, who made me feel like I belonged. I let go of toxic relationships, and with each one that faded, I felt lighter, freer. Slowly, I built a new life for myself, one where I was the priority. One afternoon, as I was finishing a meeting at work, I got a message from Amy. She had reached out after months of no contact, and for a moment I hesitated. I knew the message would probably be about Olivia, but I couldn't help but wonder if there was still unfinished business between us. I opened the message and there it was, an apology. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," it began. "I'm sorry for how things ended between us. I know I wasn't the partner you deserved, and I want you to know that I regret not appreciating you when I had the chance." I stared at the screen for a few moments, the weight of her words settling in. It wasn't the apology I had expected, it was a real apology. But there was something I had learned in the time since the divorce. I didn't need her apology to feel whole. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and put the phone down. The truth was, I didn't need her words to validate my healing process. I had already forgiven her in my heart, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to release the hold she still had over me. The next day, I replied briefly, "Thank you for your message. I've moved on, and I hope you find peace in your own life." It was simple, it was final, and it felt like the last piece of closure I needed. The one person I couldn't have walked away from, though, was Olivia. She was growing up so fast, and each day brought new moments of pride and joy. There were days when she would ask about Amy and me, about why we didn't live together anymore. I did my best to explain things in a way that didn't make her feel torn or confused. I wanted her to know that no matter what, I loved her unconditionally. There were times when I wanted to shield her from the reality of the divorce, but I knew I couldn't. I had to be honest with her, even if it was difficult. It wasn't about protecting her from the truth. It was about making sure she knew she was loved by both of us, even though we couldn't be together. I started taking Olivia to therapy as well. Not because I thought she needed it, but because I wanted to make sure she had the tools to process her emotions. The divorce affected both of us, and I wanted her to grow up knowing how to express herself healthily. As I continued to rebuild, I realized how much I had grown. The man I had been before, the one desperately seeking validation, the one who allowed himself to be controlled, was gone. In his place was someone who was self-assured and confident, who had learned to prioritize his own happiness. The biggest lesson I had learned was the importance of self-respect. I didn't need to change for anyone. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was good enough. I had always been good enough. With time, I met Sophia. She was kind, understanding, and most importantly, she had no expectations. She didn't need me to be someone I wasn't. We took things slowly, and I made sure I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking to fill a void anymore. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was complete. Sophia respected my past. She understood my need for space and my desire to move forward at my own pace. And while it was scary to let someone new into my life, I found that the more I opened up, the more I realized that this was a love I could have never experienced if I hadn't let go of the past. It wasn't perfect. Relationships never are. But it was real. It was built on mutual respect, honesty, and the understanding that we were both in this together, not to fix each other, but to grow together. As I sit here, writing this, I realize that I'm no longer the man I used to be. I'm no longer defined by the rejection, the heartbreak, or the feeling that I wasn't good enough. I learned that the moment I let go of all the expectations, all the emotional baggage, I finally began to live for myself. Amy may have never appreciated me the way I deserved, but that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had released it. The marriage was a chapter in my life, but it didn't define me. I chose to define my own path, and for the first time in years I feel free. Free to love myself, free to move forward, free to be the person I was always meant to be.